The mahogany dining table had been in the Thornfield family for 3 generations. Tonight, it felt like a battlefield. Steam rose from the untouched mashed potatoes as my father adjusted his reading glasses, the same ones he'd worn since I was 12. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire, broken only by the rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Sarah, he said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of disappointment I'd heard countless times before. Is $3,000 monthly enough? I set down my fork, the clink against the china plate echoing louder than it should have. My mother's eyes darted between us, her hands fidgeting with her napkin. She knew what was coming. We all did. Enough for what, Dad? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Enough to justify throwing away your law degree. Enough to make sense of this military phase you're going through? Military phase. As if my 8 years of service were some teenage rebellion that I'd eventually outgrow. As if the Bronze Star gathering dust in my apartment meant nothing. As if the sleepless nights in Afghanistan were just expensive therapy sessions. But here's the thing about family dinners and disappointed fathers. They never prepare you for the moment when everything you thought you knew about your life gets turned upside down. They never warn you that sometimes the phone call that changes everything comes right when you're wondering if you've made the biggest mistake of your life. The argument started the way most family arguments do, with good intentions wrapped in terrible timing. My father, Dr. Richard Thornfield, had built his orthopedic practice from scratch in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio. He understood success in terms of corner offices, 6-figure salaries, and retirement plans. He understood it in terms of stability, respectability, and the kind of life that made sense to explain at dinner parties. What he didn't understand was why his daughter, who had graduated summa cum laude from Ohio State Law School, would choose to make $36,000 a year as a captain in the United States Army. I've spoken with Morrison, Patterson, and Associates, he continued, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. They're willing to interview you next week. Starting salary is $120,000 plus bonuses. Benefits package includes health, dental, and a company car. My mother, Linda, finally spoke up. Richard, maybe we should. No, Linda. Someone needs to talk sense into her. He gestured toward me with his knife. Sarah, you're 32 years old. You can't live on Army wages forever. What about a house? What about a family? What about your future? The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, having spent the last 3 years training soldiers who would deploy to some of the most dangerous places on Earth, and my father was worried about my future. Here I was, responsible for the lives and welfare of 237 men and women, and he was questioning my ability to manage my own finances. The money isn't everything, Dad, I said, reaching for my water glass. Some things matter more than a paycheck. His laugh was sharp, bitter. Spoken like someone who's never had to worry about money. You think your principals will pay for your mother's medical bills when she gets older? You think your sense of duty will cover your own health care when you're 60? That stung because it wasn't entirely wrong. My bank account had seen better days. My apartment was a modest 1-bedroom in a complex that had seen better decades. My car was a 2018 Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door from a parking lot incident I couldn't afford to fix. But there were things my father couldn't quantify, couldn't put in a spreadsheet, or explain to his golf buddies. Like the letter I'd received last month from Private Jessica Chen's mother, thanking me for the training that had saved her daughter's life during an IED attack in Syria. Like the promotion ceremony where I'd watched Sergeant Martinez, a high school dropout from East LA, accept his college diploma, a goal he'd achieved because I'd spent countless hours helping him navigate the military education system. You don't understand what I do, I said, my voice steady despite the frustration building in my chest. You see the paycheck, but you don't see the purpose. Purpose doesn't pay rent, Sarah. Purpose doesn't build wealth. Purpose doesn't. The argument might have continued indefinitely, circling the same tired orbit of disappointment and misunderstanding, but my phone rang. The ringtone was standard, nothing special, but something about the timing made all three of us freeze. K. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Washington area code. Don't answer that, my father said. We're having a family discussion. But something in my gut told me this wasn't a call I could ignore. 8 years in the military teaches you to recognize the weight of certain moments, the way the air changes when something significant is about to happen. This felt like one of those moments. I need to take this, I said, pushing back from the table. Sarah, 1 minute, Dad. I promise. I walked into the living room, my mother's concerned eyes following me. The familiar weight of military training kicked in. Stand straight, speak clearly, be ready for anything. Captain Sarah Thornfield speaking. Captain Thornfield, this is General Patricia Morrison from the Pentagon. I apologize for interrupting your evening, but I need to speak with you immediately about a matter of national security. The words hit me like a physical blow. The Pentagon. National security. My father's voice drifted from the dining room, something about responsibility and making smart choices, but it sounded like it was coming from underwater. General Morrison, Yes, ma'am, I'm listening. Captain, I am calling because your name has come up in connection with Operation Blackstone. I assume you're familiar with the classified work you did in Afghanistan regarding intelligence networks? I was familiar with it. More familiar than I wanted to be. The 3 months I'd spent embedded with a special operations unit, helping to map and dismantle a complex network of insurgent communications. The work that had earned me a Bronze Star and a security clearance that I'd hoped never to use again. Yes, ma'am, I remember. Good. Because that network wasn't as dismantled as we thought. Intelligence suggests it has reformed, expanded, and is now operating on American soil. We need someone who understands how they operate, someone who's seen their methods firsthand. The room seemed to tilt slightly. American soil. The phrase carried implications that made my throat tight. Ma'am, I'm currently stationed at Fort Benning. I'm not sure how I can. Captain Thornfield, the general interrupted. I'm not calling to ask for your help. I'm calling to inform you that as of tomorrow morning, you are being temporarily reassigned to a joint task force operating under direct Pentagon authority. Your new classification level is Top Secret/SCI, and your new title is Task Force Commander. Commander. The words seemed to hang in the air like smoke. In the dining room, my father was still talking, probably listing the benefits of corporate law, the stability of civilian life, the importance of thinking practically about the future. Ma'am, I appreciate the confidence, but I'm not sure I'm qualified to. Captain, excuse me, Commander. You are one of only 7 people in the entire United States military who has direct experience with this particular network. You've seen their operational patterns, their communication methods, their recruitment strategies. Right now, that makes you the most qualified person in the country for this assignment. I looked toward the dining room, where my parents were waiting. My father, who thought my military career was a waste of time and talent. My mother, who supported me but worried constantly about my safety. The life they wanted for me, stable, predictable, safe, seemed to be receding like a tide. What exactly would this assignment involve? You would be leading a team of analysts, field agents, and technical specialists. Your primary objective would be to identify and neutralize the network before they can carry out what we believe is a significant planned attack on American infrastructure. The timeline is compressed. Compressed. Military speak for we're running out of time. How compressed? We believe they're planning to move within the next 6 weeks. Maybe sooner. 6 weeks to stop a terrorist attack on American soil. 6 weeks to justify 8 years of military service, 3 years of specialized training, and a Bronze Star that my father thought was just an expensive paperweight. Ma'am, can I ask who recommended me for this position? That information is classified, but I can tell you that the recommendation came from someone very high up in the intelligence community, someone who specifically requested you by name. The mystery deepened. I'd worked with dozens of intelligence personnel during my deployment, but I couldn't think of anyone who would have that kind of influence at the Pentagon level. General Morrison, I need to ask, what happens to my current assignment? My soldiers at Fort Benning? Your XO, Major Rodriguez, will assume temporary command. Your soldiers will be informed that you've been selected for a special assignment. They won't be given details, but they'll understand that this is an honor, not a punishment. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. An honor. The word felt heavy with implications I wasn't sure I was ready to understand. Ma'am, I need some time to think about this. I understand this is sudden, Commander, but I need an answer tonight. A car will be at your location in 45 minutes to transport you to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. From there, you'll be flown to Washington for a full briefing. If you decline this assignment, we'll find someone else, but I want you to understand that we're asking you because we believe you're the best person for the job. 45 minutes. In 45 minutes, my life would either continue on its current trajectory, the trajectory my father considered a dead end, or it would change in ways I couldn't begin to imagine. Commander? General Morrison's voice pulled me back to the present. What's your decision? Through the archway, I could see my parents still sitting at the dining table. My father had moved on to dessert, probably assuming I was dealing with some routine military communication. My mother was watching me with the kind of maternal intuition that could read disaster in a change of posture. The $3,000 monthly suddenly seemed like the least important thing in the world. General Morrison, I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. I accept the assignment. Outstanding. The transport will be there in 45 minutes. Pack light. Everything you need will be provided in Washington. And Commander? Yes, ma'am? This conversation never happened. As far as anyone knows, you received orders for a routine reassignment. Your family doesn't need to know the details. The line went dead, leaving me standing in my childhood living room, surrounded by family photos and participation trophies, holding a phone that had just delivered news that would change everything. 44 minutes to pack a life. 44 minutes to figure out how to tell my parents that their daughter, the one they thought was wasting her potential in the military, had just been selected to lead a mission that could prevent a terrorist attack on American soil. 44 minutes to transform from the disappointment at the dinner table to the commander they apparently needed me to be. I walked back toward the dining room, where my father was still talking about the advantages of civilian life, still convinced that my military career was a mistake that needed correcting. If only he knew what was coming next. Yeah. Walking back into that dining room felt like crossing into a different universe. The chandelier cast the same warm glow. The antique hutch still displayed my mother's collection of ceramic birds, and my father still sat in his usual chair, methodically working through his slice of apple pie. But everything had fundamentally shifted. The woman who had left this room 3 minutes ago was a disappointed daughter with a modest military salary. The woman returning was apparently qualified to lead a classified operation against terrorist networks. Who was that? My mother asked, her fork hovering halfway to her mouth. She had that particular expression she'd worn when I was 16 and came home 20 minutes past curfew. Concerned, but trying not to show it. Work, I said, settling back into my chair. The word felt inadequate, like calling a hurricane, quote, 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 quote. My father looked up from his dessert. On a Sunday night? Sarah, this is exactly what I'm talking about. No respect for personal time, no boundaries between work and life. In corporate law, you have weekends, you have holidays, you have a life outside the office, if he only knew. In 39 minutes, a government car would arrive to take me to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. From there, a military transport would carry me to Washington, where I would receive a briefing about preventing a terrorist attack on American soil. But as far as my father knew, I was still the daughter who was throwing away her potential for a modest paycheck and uncertain future. It's not that simple, Dad, I said, cutting into my own piece of pie. The apples were perfectly spiced, the crust golden and flaky. My mother had been making this same recipe for 20 years, and somehow tonight it tasted like goodbye. It is that simple, he insisted. You choose your priorities. You choose what matters. Right now you're choosing uncertainty over stability, adventure over security, and frankly, I don't understand it. The irony was almost painful. Here I was, about to embark on what was possibly the most important mission of my career, and my father was still convinced I was wasting my life. The bronze star sitting in my apartment wasn't just a piece of metal. It represented the time I'd spent embedded with Special Operations Forces, learning to identify and dismantle the exact type of network that was now apparently operating on American soil. "Richard," my mother said gently, "maybe we should support Sarah's choices instead of questioning them." "Support her choices?" He set down his fork with more force than necessary. "Linda, she's 32 years old. She should be thinking about buying a house, starting a family, building something permanent. Instead, she's chasing some romantic notion of service that's going to leave her broke and alone." The words stung because they touched on fears I'd carried for years. My bank account wasn't impressive. My romantic life was non-existent. My apartment was furnished with hand-me-downs and military surplus. By conventional measures, my father had a point. But conventional measures didn't account for the satisfaction of training soldiers who went on to save lives, or the pride of earning respect in one of the most demanding professions in the world. "I'm not chasing anything, Dad. I'm building something you can't see." "Building what? A pension that won't kick in for another 12 years? A resume that won't translate to civilian employment?" "Sarah, I'm trying to help you here." I glanced at the clock on the mantel. 35 minutes. In 35 minutes, I would need to have packed whatever I could carry and said goodbye to my parents without being able to explain where I was going or why. General Morrison's words echoed in my mind. "This conversation never happened. As far as anyone knows, you received orders for a routine reassignment." "What if I told you," I said carefully, "that my work might be more important than you realize?" "Important how? Important to whom?" "Sarah, you're training soldiers at Fort Benning. It's valuable work, I'm sure, but it's not exactly saving the world." If only he knew how wrong he was. The soldiers I'd trained had deployed to Afghanistan, Syria, and Iraq. They had conducted operations that had prevented attacks, saved civilian lives, and gathered intelligence that had made America safer. But that wasn't the kind of work you could explain at dinner parties or quantify in annual salary reviews. "What if I told you," I continued, "that I might be getting a promotion?" My mother's eyes lit up. "A promotion? Sarah, that's wonderful. Why didn't you say something earlier?" "Because it's not official yet," I said, which was technically true. The phone call was exploratory. My father's expression shifted slightly. "What kind of promotion?" "The kind that comes with more responsibility, more trust, more significance." "But the same pay grade?" he asked, cutting straight to what he considered the heart of the matter. "The pay isn't the point, Dad. The pay is always the point." His voice rose slightly, causing my mother to glance nervously toward the neighbor's house. "Sarah, you can't eat honor. You can't live in a house made of good intentions. You can't retire on respect from your peers." I looked at my parents, really looked at them. My mother, who had supported every decision I'd made, even when she didn't understand them. My father, who was genuinely worried about my future, even if he had a terrible way of showing it. They had raised me to be independent, to think for myself, to pursue what mattered to me, but they had also raised me in a world where success was measured in salary figures and retirement accounts. "What if I told you," I said, my voice quiet but steady, "that I might be able to do something that really matters, something that could make a real difference?" "You keep talking in hypotheticals," my father said. "What exactly are you trying to tell us?" 32 minutes. The car would arrive in 32 minutes. And I still hadn't figured out how to explain my sudden departure without revealing classified information. How do you tell your parents that their daughter, the one they think is wasting her potential, has been selected to lead a mission that could prevent a terrorist attack? "I'm trying to tell you that maybe you don't see the whole picture," I said. "Maybe my career isn't the dead end you think it is." "Sarah," my mother said gently, "what's really going on? You seem different, tense." She was right. The phone call had changed something fundamental in my posture, my breathing, the way I held my shoulders. Years of military training had taught me to compartmentalize, to maintain operational security even under stress, but my mother had known me for 32 years. She could read the signs. "I need to pack," I said, standing up from the table. "Pack?" My father looked confused. "Pack for what?" "I'm being reassigned. I need to report to my new duty station." When? My mother asked. Tonight. The word hung in the air like a physical presence. My parents exchanged glances that contained 37 years of marriage, 32 years of parenting, and the sudden realization that their daughter was about to walk out the door into something they couldn't control or understand. Tonight, my father repeated. Sarah, it's Sunday evening. The military doesn't just reassign people on Sunday evening unless… He stopped talking. I could see the wheels turning in his mind, the lawyer's instinct for pattern recognition kicking in. Sudden reassignments on Sunday evenings. Phone calls from Washington. His daughter's tense posture and evasive answers. Unless what, Dad? Unless it's an emergency, he said quietly. Unless something has happened that requires immediate response. My mother's face went pale. Sarah, are you being deployed? Are you going somewhere dangerous? I can't discuss the details of my assignment, I said, falling back on the standard military response. But I can tell you that I've been selected for something important, something that will make use of my training and experience. How important? My father asked. Important enough that they called me on a Sunday night. Important enough that I leave tonight. The dining room fell silent except for the grandfather clock in the hallway. 28 minutes. I needed to go upstairs and pack, but I also needed to find a way to say goodbye to my parents without revealing that I might be walking into the most dangerous assignment of my career. I need to ask you both something, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos in my chest. I need you to trust me. I need you to believe that the choices I've made, the path I've chosen, have led me to this moment for a reason. What kind of reason? My father asked. The kind that justifies 8 years of military service. The kind that makes a Bronze Star meaningful. The kind that proves your daughter isn't wasting her life. My mother stood up and walked around the table to hug me. She didn't ask questions or demand explanations. She simply held me the way she had when I was 7 and had fallen off my bike, when I was 17, and had broken up with my first boyfriend, when I was 24, and had called to tell her I was joining the army. I'm proud of you, she whispered. I've always been proud of you. Over her shoulder, I saw my father watching us. His expression was complicated. Confusion, concern, and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. Sarah, he said, I want you to know that even when I don't understand your choices, I respect them. I respect you. 25 minutes. I pulled away from my mother's hug and looked at both of them. I need to go pack. The car will be here soon. What should we tell people? My mother asked. Your Aunt Margaret, the neighbors, people at church. Tell them I received an important assignment. Tell them I'm doing work that matters. Tell them I paused, searching for words that were both true and safe. Tell them I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I headed toward the stairs, then turned back. My parents were still standing by the dining table, looking smaller somehow, older. The argument about money and career paths seemed like it had happened in another lifetime. Dad, I said, that question you asked about the $3,000 monthly? He nodded. The answer is yes, it's enough. It's enough because it's not about the money. It's about the opportunity to do something that matters. And tonight I'm about to find out just how much it matters. I ran upstairs to my childhood bedroom, which my mother had preserved exactly as I'd left it when I joined the army. The walls were covered with high school awards, college pennants, and photographs of friends I barely spoke to anymore. But tonight, looking at the remnants of my former life, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt ready. 22 minutes to pack 8 years of military training, 3 years of specialized knowledge, and a lifetime of preparation into a single duffel bag. 22 minutes to transform from the disappointed daughter at the dinner table into the commander the Pentagon apparently needed me to be. I opened my closet and began pulling out uniforms, wondering if my parents would ever understand that their daughter hadn't been wasting her life. She'd been preparing for this moment all along. The car would arrive in 20 minutes. Whatever came next, I would face it with the training, experience, and confidence that my father thought were worth $36,000 a year. I was about to discover they were worth considerably more than that. The black sedan arrived exactly on time, pulling into my parents' driveway with the kind of precision that suggested its driver had done this before. Through my bedroom window, I watched a woman in a navy blue suit step out and check her watch. She didn't look around nervously or try to blend in with the suburban neighborhood. She simply stood by the car and waited, projecting the quiet confidence of someone who worked in circles where punctuality wasn't just expected, it was a matter of national security. I shouldered my duffel bag and took one last look around the room where I'd spent the first 18 years of my life. The academic achievement awards seemed smaller now, the participation trophies almost quaint. The girl who had earned those accolades had dreamed of making a difference in the world, but she'd never imagined it would look like this. Downstairs, my parents were waiting in the foyer. My mother clutched a brown paper bag that I knew contained sandwiches, homemade cookies, and a thermos of coffee, her standard response to any situation that required her daughter to travel more than 50 miles from home. My father held a business card between his fingers, turning it over and over like a worry stone. "Money, I want you to have this," he said, extending the card toward me. "It's my attorney friend in Washington, David Kellerman. He specializes in military law. If you ever need someone to—" "Dad," I interrupted gently, "I appreciate it, but I don't think I'll need legal representation." "You never know," he said, his voice carrying an edge of paternal concern that made my chest tight. "Sometimes the military asks people to do things that aren't in their best interest. Sometimes they need someone to remind them of their rights." I took the card and slipped it into my pocket, not because I thought I'd need it, but because I recognized the gesture for what it was. A father's way of trying to protect his daughter when he couldn't understand the dangers she might face. "I have to go," I said, embracing both of them. "I'll call when I can." "When will that be?" my mother asked. "I don't know. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. It depends on—" "On what you can't tell us," my father finished. "Yes." He nodded slowly, and I saw something in his expression that I hadn't seen during our dinner table argument. Respect. Maybe even the beginning of understanding that his daughter's career wasn't the disappointment he'd thought it was. The woman by the car introduced herself as Agent Catherine Wells. She was probably in her early 40s, with silver threading through her dark hair and the kind of handshake that suggested she'd earned her position through competence rather than connections. She took my duffel bag without asking and placed it in the trunk with movements that were both efficient and practiced. "Commander Thornfield," she said, opening the rear door for me. "I apologize for the short notice, but timing is critical for this operation." Operation. The word sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the October evening air. I'd been on operations before, but they'd been in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, places where American soldiers expected to face danger. The idea of an operation on American soil carried implications that made my throat constrict. As we pulled away from the house, I caught a glimpse of my parents standing in the doorway, backlit by the warm glow of the foyer chandelier. They looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable. For 32 years, they'd been the adults, the ones who made decisions and solved problems. Now, for the first time, I was walking into something they couldn't fix or understand. "Agent Wells," I said as we turned onto the highway, "can you tell me anything about what I'm walking into?" She glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "I can tell you that you're about to become part of something that most people never hear about. The kind of work that happens in the shadows, where success is measured not by what happens but by what doesn't happen. And what exactly isn't going to happen? That depends on how good you are at your job, Commander." The 40-minute drive to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base passed in relative silence. I found myself studying the landscape of central Ohio, the farmland, the small towns, the truck stops and diners, where families gathered for Sunday evening dinners, just like the one I'd left behind. These were the places and people I'd sworn to protect when I took my oath as an Army officer, but tonight they felt more real, more immediate than they ever had before. Wright-Patterson was a sprawling complex of hangars, offices, and research facilities that housed everything from experimental aircraft to classified technology programs. Agent Wells drove directly to a section of the base I'd never seen before, where a sleek military transport waited on the tarmac. The aircraft was unmarked, its windows tinted dark enough to prevent anyone from seeing inside. "This is where I leave you," Agent Wells said, retrieving my duffel bag from the trunk. There's a flight crew waiting inside, and they'll take you directly to Andrews Air Force Base. From there, you'll be driven to your briefing location. What kind of briefing location? The kind where people discuss things that never officially happened. I climbed the steps into the aircraft, which was configured more like a mobile office than a passenger plane. Leather seats surrounded a central table equipped with secure communication equipment, multiple monitors, and what appeared to be a satellite uplink system. The only other passenger was a man in his 50s wearing a colonel's uniform, who looked up from a stack of classified documents as I entered. "Commander Thornfield," he said, standing to shake my hand. "Colonel James Mitchell, Defense Intelligence Agency. I'll be your liaison for this operation." "Colonel Mitchell," I replied, settling into the seat across from him. "I have to admit, I'm still not entirely sure what this operation involves." "That's about to change," he said, activating one of the monitors. "What I'm about to show you is classified at the highest levels. The information in this briefing is known to fewer than 30 people in the entire United States government." The monitor displayed a map of the United States with red dots scattered across major cities: New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Miami, Atlanta, Dallas, and a dozen others. Each dot pulsed slowly, creating a pattern that looked disturbingly like a heartbeat. "These represent suspected cell locations for a network we've been tracking for the past 18 months, Colonel Mitchell explained. The same network you encountered in Afghanistan, but evolved, expanded, and now operating on American soil." The implications hit me like a physical blow. The network I'd helped dismantle in Afghanistan, the one that had cost lives on both sides, the one that had earned me a Bronze Star for my intelligence work, hadn't been destroyed. It had simply moved operations to a new theater. "How is that possible?" I asked. "We traced their communication systems, identified their leadership structure, eliminated their funding sources. The network was neutralized." "The network was disrupted," Colonel Mitchell corrected. "But the people who ran it were smarter than we gave them credit for. They recognized that their Afghan operation was compromised, so they activated sleeper cells that had been in place for years. Cells that were completely independent of the Afghan network, but shared the same operational philosophy." "What kind of operational philosophy?" "Asymmetric warfare targeting critical infrastructure. Their goal isn't to kill as many people as possible. It's to create maximum disruption with minimum resources. They want to demonstrate that the United States is vulnerable, that our government can't protect its own citizens." The aircraft began to taxi toward the runway, its engines spinning up with a whine that seemed to underscore the urgency of the situation. Through the small window, I could see the lights of Dayton receding below us, each one representing families who had no idea that their country might be under attack. "What's their target?" I asked. "We believe they're planning a coordinated attack on the electrical grid. If they succeed, they could plunge the entire eastern seaboard into darkness, for weeks, maybe months. The economic impact would be catastrophic. The human cost." He paused, letting the implications speak for themselves. "And you think I can stop them? I think you understand how they operate better than anyone else in the country. You've seen their recruitment methods, their communication protocols, their planning processes. You know how they think." The aircraft lifted off, banking sharply to the east. Below us, the lights of Ohio gave way to the darkness of rural Pennsylvania, then the glow of cities along the eastern corridor. Somewhere in that tapestry of lights, terrorist cells were making final preparations for an attack that could cripple the country. "Tell me about the task force," I said. 43 people, drawn from every major intelligence agency, law enforcement organization, and military unit in the country. FBI counterterrorism specialists, CIA analysts, NSA cryptographers, special forces operators, and cybersecurity experts. The best minds we have, all reporting to you. Reporting to me? The weight of the responsibility settled on my shoulders like a lead blanket. "Colonel, I'm a company commander. I've never led anything bigger than a battalion-sized operation. Commander, you're not leading this task force because of your rank. You're leading it because you have something that can't be taught in any military school: direct experience with the enemy's methods. Every person on that task force is an expert in their field, but none of them have looked into the eyes of the people we're hunting. What makes you think I can coordinate 43 specialists from different agencies? Because 3 years ago, you coordinated a joint operation involving special forces, CIA operatives, and Afghan military units. You identified a network that had evaded detection for 2 years, mapped their entire organizational structure, and directed the operations that dismantled their Afghan branch. The operation was so successful that it's studied at the War College as an example of perfect intelligence integration. I remembered that operation, but I'd never thought of it in those terms. It had been 3 months of 18-hour days, constant stress, and life-or-death decisions made with incomplete information. It had been the most challenging period of my military career, but also the most rewarding. The difference is that this time, we're not operating in a war zone, I said. We're operating in American cities, with American citizens, under American laws. Which makes it infinitely more complicated, Colonel Mitchell agreed, but also infinitely more important. In Afghanistan, we were fighting to protect American interests. Here, we're fighting to protect America itself. The aircraft began its descent toward Andrews Air Force Base, the lights of Washington, D.C. spreading out below us like a circuit board. Somewhere in that maze of government buildings, my new task force was waiting for orders from a commander they'd never met, preparing to hunt an enemy that most Americans didn't know existed. "Colonel," I said as the aircraft touched down, "what happens if we fail?" "Then your father's concerns about your career prospects will be the least of anyone's worries," he replied grimly. "Because if we fail, there might not be much of a country left to build a career in." The aircraft taxied to a stop at a secluded section of Andrews Air Force Base, where another unmarked vehicle waited to transport me to my briefing location. As I gathered my gear and prepared to step into the most important mission of my life, I thought about the conversation I'd had with my parents just 3 hours earlier. My father had asked if $3,000 monthly was enough. Tonight, I was about to discover that some questions can't be answered in terms of money. Some responsibilities can't be measured in salary figures or retirement benefits. Some things are worth more than any paycheck could ever represent. The car that would take me to my new life was waiting outside, its engine running, and its driver ready to deliver me to a world where the daughter, who disappointed her parents at dinner, would transform into the commander, who might save the country they all loved. The transformation was about to begin. The briefing facility existed in a space that officially didn't exist. Located 3 stories beneath a nondescript office building in Arlington, Virginia, it housed the kind of technology that most people only saw in movies. Holographic displays projected 3-dimensional maps of American cities, while banks of quantum computers processed intelligence data faster than the human mind could comprehend. The air hummed with the electronic heartbeat of a digital war room where analysts tracked threats that could reshape the world. My task force was already assembled when I arrived at 0200 hours. 43 of the most talented individuals in their respective fields, representing every major intelligence and law enforcement agency in the United States. They stood around a central briefing table, their expressions ranging from curious to skeptical. I recognized the look. These were people accustomed to being the smartest person in the room, suddenly asked to follow someone they'd never heard of. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the FBI's lead counterterrorism analyst, was reviewing satellite imagery on her tablet. Agent Marcus Chen from the CIA's Directorate of Operations studied communication intercepts with the intensity of a chess master analyzing an opponent's strategy. Captain Lisa Rodriguez from Army Special Forces examined tactical deployment options, while NSA cryptographer Dr. James Patterson worked through encrypted message patterns on multiple screens simultaneously. "Ladies and gentlemen," Colonel Mitchell announced, "Commander Sarah Thornfield." The room fell silent. 43 pairs of eyes focused on me, with the kind of scrutiny reserved for medical diagnoses and job interviews. These people had read my classified file, studied my operational history, and probably formed opinions about whether I was qualified to lead them. The weight of their expectations settled on my shoulders like a physical presence. "I know what you're thinking," I said, stepping toward the central table. "You're wondering why someone with my rank and experience is standing here instead of a general or an admiral. You're questioning whether I understand the scope of this operation, the complexity of the threat we're facing, or the consequences of failure." Several heads nodded slightly. Dr. Vasquez looked up from her tablet, her expression unreadable. 3 years ago, I spent 96 days embedded with a Special Forces unit in Afghanistan. Our mission was to identify and dismantle a terrorist network that had evaded every previous attempt at detection. For 3 months, I lived in conditions that would challenge survival experts, worked with incomplete intelligence, and made decisions that determined whether operations succeeded or American soldiers died. I activated the central holographic display, which projected a 3-dimensional map of Afghanistan with highlighted locations where the network had operated. This network used a communication system based on commercial video game platforms, encrypted their operational plans inside digital photographs shared on social media, and recruited operatives through seemingly innocent online communities. They were sophisticated, adaptive, and completely unlike anything our intelligence agencies had encountered before. Agent Chen leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. We didn't defeat them through traditional intelligence gathering or conventional military operations. We defeated them by learning to think the way they thought, to anticipate their adaptations, and to understand their motivations at a fundamental level. The Bronze Star I received wasn't for bravery under fire. It was for developing new methods of network analysis that have since been adopted by intelligence agencies worldwide. The skeptical expressions around the table began to shift. These weren't people who were impressed by rank or credentials, but they respected expertise and results. The network we're hunting now isn't just connected to the Afghan operation, it's the evolution of it. The same minds that created their original system have spent the last 3 years developing something more sophisticated, more dangerous, and specifically designed to operate within American society. Dr. Patterson looked up from his screens. Commander, the encryption patterns we've identified suggest a level of sophistication that exceeds anything we've seen from non-state actors. How confident are you that traditional network analysis will be effective? Dr. Patterson, I'm not confident at all that traditional analysis will work. That's why we're going to use methods that don't exist yet. The next 18 hours blurred together in a cascade of intelligence briefings, strategic planning sessions, and operational preparations. The threat was even more complex than Colonel Mitchell had initially described. The terrorist network had embedded itself within American society, with a patience and sophistication that bordered on genius. Their operatives weren't foreign nationals who could be identified through immigration records or surveillance systems. They were American citizens who had been radicalized gradually over years, recruited through online communities that appeared to focus on legitimate grievances about economic inequality, political corruption, or social injustice. The network had weaponized genuine social problems, turning frustrated Americans into instruments of destruction. The beauty of their system, Dr. Vasquez explained during one briefing, is that it's almost impossible to distinguish between legitimate political dissent and terrorist recruitment. They've created a pipeline that begins with completely legal activities and gradually escalates to operational planning. How many active cells do we estimate? I asked. Based on communication analysis, somewhere between 15 and 25. Each cell operates independently, with minimal contact between groups. If we eliminate one cell, the others continue functioning normally. Agent Chen pulled up a series of photographs on the main display. These are the suspected targets: power substations, data centers, transportation hubs, and financial networks. They're not trying to cause maximum casualties. They want to create maximum disruption. The strategy was diabolical in its sophistication. Rather than attempting a single spectacular attack that would unite the country against them, they planned to create a cascade of failures that would undermine public confidence in government institutions. Rolling blackouts would disrupt commerce, communication failures would prevent coordination between emergency services, and transportation problems would create supply chain disruptions that could last for months. The psychological impact would be devastating, Captain Rodriguez noted. Americans would lose faith in their government's ability to protect them. Social cohesion would break down, economic confidence would collapse, and civil unrest would become inevitable. I studied the target analysis, cross-referencing it with the communication patterns we'd identified. Something nagged at me, a pattern that seemed familiar but not quite complete. Dr. Patterson, show me the communication timeline again. The holographic display shifted to show message frequency over the past 6 months. There was a clear acceleration in the past 2 weeks, with encrypted traffic increasing by nearly 400%. They're not just planning to attack, I realized. They're planning to attack during a specific event, something that will amplify the impact of infrastructure failures. What kind of event? Colonel Mitchell asked. I thought back to my experience in Afghanistan, to the way the network had timed their operations to coincide with religious holidays, political events, or economic announcements. They understood that the impact of any attack depended as much on timing as on execution. Dr. Vasquez, what major events are scheduled for the next 2 weeks? She consulted her tablet. The Federal Reserve is announcing interest rate changes next Tuesday. There's a presidential address to Congress on Thursday. The Supreme Court is releasing several major decisions next week. And… She paused, her expression changing. What is it? The annual stress test of the national electrical grid is scheduled for next Monday. It's a routine procedure where power companies temporarily reduce capacity to test emergency response systems. The pieces suddenly clicked together with horrifying clarity. The network wasn't planning to attack the electrical grid. They were planning to attack during the stress test, when the system would already be operating at reduced capacity. Instead of causing temporary blackouts, they would create permanent infrastructure damage that could take months to repair. How many people know about the stress test schedule? I asked. It's public information, Dr. Vasquez replied. Published on Department of Energy websites, announced in industry publications, covered by financial news networks. And it's in 6 days. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. We had 6 days to identify and neutralize between 15 and 25 terrorist cells operating across the entire United States. 6 days to prevent an attack that could cripple the country's electrical infrastructure for months. Commander, Colonel Mitchell said, what are your orders? I looked around the table at 43 of the most capable people in the country, each one waiting for direction from someone who had been eating dinner with her parents 8 hours earlier. The woman who had worried about disappointing her father was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that some responsibilities transcended personal concerns. We're going to divide into 3 operational teams, I said. Team Alpha will focus on identifying cell locations through communication analysis and surveillance. Team Beta will coordinate with local law enforcement to prepare simultaneous raids. Team Gamma will work with utility companies to develop contingency plans in case we miss any targets. What about operational security? Agent Chen asked. If the network suspects we're onto them, they might accelerate their timeline. We'll conduct this operation under the cover of routine infrastructure security assessments. As far as anyone outside this room knows, we're preparing for the stress test, not hunting terrorists. The next 5 days became a masterclass in coordinated intelligence operations. Team Alpha identified 17 confirmed cell locations through a combination of communication intercepts, financial tracking, and behavioral analysis. Team Beta coordinated with FBI field offices, local SWAT teams, and state police units to prepare simultaneous raids across 12 states. Team Gamma worked with utility companies to implement additional security measures while maintaining the appearance of routine preparation. I slept maybe 8 hours total during those 5 days, sustained by adrenaline, caffeine, and the knowledge that failure wasn't an option. My phone buzzed constantly with updates from team leaders, intelligence reports from field agents, and status reports from utility companies. But through it all, one number remained prominent in my mind: $3,000 monthly. That was the salary my father thought was insufficient to justify my career choices. That was the amount he believed proved I was wasting my potential, making poor decisions, failing to build a secure future. On the morning of the operation, as I watched 43 of the country's best intelligence professionals execute a plan that would prevent a catastrophic terrorist attack, I finally understood what my father had never grasped. Some things can't be measured in monthly salaries or retirement contributions. Some work is valuable precisely because its true impact can never be quantified. Commander, Dr. Vasquez reported at 0530 hours. All teams are in position. We have visual confirmation on 16 of 17 targets. Team leaders are requesting authorization to proceed. Authorization granted, I said. Execute simultaneous raids in 3, 2, 1. Go. The next 20 minutes became the longest of my life. Status reports flooded in from field teams across the country as FBI agents, local police, and military personnel moved against terrorist cells in cities from Seattle to Miami. One by one, the reports came back. Suspects in custody, bomb-making materials seized, attack plans recovered. Boston, suspects secured. Atlanta, weapons cache confiscated. Phoenix, communications equipment captured. Denver, cell eliminated. 15 successful raids. 1,000 pounds of explosive materials seized. 28 suspects in federal custody. Attack plans that detailed exactly how they planned to exploit the stress test to cause maximum infrastructure damage. But one cell remained unaccounted for. Team Alpha, status on cell 17? I asked. Dr. Patterson looked up from his screens, his expression grim. Commander, we lost contact with the surveillance team in Chicago 30 minutes ago. The target location appears to be abandoned. My stomach dropped. A missing cell meant operational plans we hadn't discovered, attack methods we hadn't anticipated, targets we hadn't protected. Dr. Vasquez, pull up the Chicago cell's communication history. I want to know everything about their operational patterns. As she worked, I thought back to Afghanistan, to the moment when I'd realized that the network we were hunting had anticipated our methods and adapted accordingly. The same thing was happening here. The Chicago cell had recognized that their security was compromised and activated contingency plans. Commander, Agent Chen called out, we're receiving reports of suspicious activity at the Midwest Regional Control Center. Multiple individuals with maintenance credentials accessed restricted areas approximately 20 minutes ago. The Regional Control Center managed electrical distribution for Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin. If the Chicago cell succeeded in damaging critical components during the stress test, they could cascade failures across 3 states. How long until the stress test begins? I asked. 47 minutes, Colonel Mitchell replied. Can we delay the test? Not without alerting every utility company in the country that we're running an active counterterrorism operation. If word leaks, other cells might activate emergency protocols. I stared at the holographic display showing power distribution across the Midwest. Millions of people going about their Monday morning routines, completely unaware that their electricity, their communications, their entire technological infrastructure hung in the balance. Team Beta, what assets do we have near the Chicago facility? Local FBI field team is 12 minutes out. Chicago PD tactical unit is 8 minutes out. But Commander, if the suspects are already inside the facility, they could complete their sabotage before we arrive, I finished. The facility's security system showed multiple individuals moving through restricted areas, but the camera angles weren't sufficient to confirm identities or determine exactly what they were doing. All I knew was that in 45 minutes, the stress test would begin, and any damage they caused would be amplified across the entire regional grid. Dr. Patterson, can we contact the facility directly? Their communication systems are hardened against external interference. Standard protocol during maintenance operations. What about cutting power to the facility? That would trigger automatic safety systems that could cause exactly the kind of cascade failure they're trying to create. I closed my eyes and thought back to the lessons I'd learned in Afghanistan. Sometimes the best solution isn't the most obvious one. Sometimes you have to think like your enemy to defeat them. Dr. Vasquez, show me the Chicago cell's recruitment profile. The display shifted to show biographical information about the suspected cell members: engineers, computer technicians, utility workers, people with legitimate access to infrastructure systems and the technical knowledge to cause maximum damage. They're not trying to destroy the facility, I realized. They're trying to reprogram it. Instead of causing immediate damage, they want to insert malicious code that will activate during future stress tests. That would be even worse, Colonel Mitchell said. We'd never know when the next attack was coming. Agent Chen, contact the Chicago field team. Tell them to focus on the computer systems, not the physical infrastructure. The suspects are probably in the main control room, not the equipment areas. Commander, how can you be certain? Because that's what I would do. The next 15 minutes felt like hours. The FBI team reached the facility and confirmed that 5 individuals with stolen maintenance credentials had accessed the main control room. A tactical team breached the room and found them installing hardware that would have given them remote access to the electrical grid throughout the Midwest. 5 more suspects are in custody. Malicious hardware removed before it could be activated. The stress test proceeded normally, with no cascading failures and no infrastructure damage. At 1,100 hours, I stood in the briefing room and watched status reports from across the country. 33 suspects in federal custody. Multiple attack plots disrupted. Critical infrastructure protected. The operation had succeeded beyond our most optimistic projections. Commander, Colonel Mitchell said, I've received authorization to inform you that this operation will be classified at the highest levels. The American people will never know how close they came to a catastrophic attack, and they'll never know who prevented it. I nodded, understanding the implications. There would be no public recognition, no media coverage, no opportunity for my parents to finally understand what their daughter actually did for a living. The work would remain invisible, the success unmeasurable by conventional standards. But as I looked around the room at 43 exhausted professionals who had just prevented one of the most sophisticated terrorist attacks in American history, I realized that some accomplishments don't need public recognition. Some satisfaction comes from knowing that you've done something that truly mattered, regardless of who gets credit. 3 weeks later, I was back at Fort Benning, training soldiers and living on $36,000 a year. My parents still didn't understand why I'd chosen military service over corporate law. My father is still worried about my financial future, my lack of a retirement plan, and my modest lifestyle. But I'd received something more valuable than any salary increase or stock options. I'd received confirmation that the path I'd chosen, the sacrifices I'd made, the years of training and preparation, had led me to exactly where I needed to be at exactly the moment my country needed me. The Bronze Star in my apartment wasn't just a piece of metal. It represented the journey that had prepared me to lead a mission that saved millions of Americans from a catastrophe they would never know they'd avoided. My father had asked if $3,000 monthly was enough. Now I knew the answer wasn't about the money at all. It was about being ready when the Pentagon called. It was about having the skills, experience, and judgment to make decisions that protected the country I'd sworn to defend. Some things are worth more than any paycheck could ever represent. Some responsibilities transcend salary negotiations and career planning. Some work is valuable precisely because its true impact can never be quantified or publicly acknowledged. The woman who had disappointed her father at a family dinner had become the commander who prevented a terrorist attack on American soil. The daughter who worried about her modest monthly salary had led an operation that protected the infrastructure supporting the world's largest economy. And somewhere in a classified file that would never be declassified, there was a record proving that sometimes the most important work happens in the shadows, performed by people whose names will never appear in history books but whose actions shape the future of the world. My father was right about one thing. $3,000 monthly wasn't enough. It was worth infinitely more than he could ever imagine. 6 months after the operation, I received a promotion to major and a new assignment at the Pentagon. The official reason was my, quote, exceptional performance in classified operations. The real reason was that someone in the intelligence community wanted to keep me close to Washington, ready for the next crisis that required unconventional thinking. My parents attended the promotion ceremony, proud but still confused about what I actually did for the government. During the reception afterward, my father approached me with the same expression he'd worn during our family dinner conversation. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I may not understand your work, but I can see that it matters to you. And recently, I've started to think that maybe mattering is more important than I realized." It wasn't a full apology, but it was acknowledgement. Recognition that his daughter hadn't been wasting her life after all, even if he couldn't comprehend the scope of what she'd accomplished. As we stood together in dress blues and civilian formal wear, surrounded by military officials whose names appeared in classified briefings but never newspaper headlines, I understood that some victories are measured not in public recognition but in private knowledge, that you've made a difference when it counted most. My mother pulled me aside near the end of the ceremony, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I always knew," she whispered. "I didn't understand the details, but I always knew you were doing something important. A mother can sense these things." She was right, of course. While my father had focused on spreadsheets and salary comparisons, my mother had seen the weight I carried, the way I held myself differently after certain phone calls, the pride that couldn't be explained by a modest bank account. She'd trusted her instincts even when the evidence seemed to contradict them. 2 years later, I was selected for the Army War College, a stepping stone toward general officer rank that would have seemed impossible during that family dinner conversation. The recommendation letter, written by General Morrison herself, contained a single line that I'd never forget. "Major Thornfield represents the finest example of an officer who understands that true service transcends personal ambition." During my time at the War College, I developed new protocols for interagency cooperation during domestic security threats. The methods we'd pioneered during Operation Blackstone became standard procedure for similar situations. Other officers studied our approach, analyzed our decision-making process, and learned from techniques that had been developed in the heat of preventing national catastrophe. The irony wasn't lost on me that my father's legal training had actually prepared me better than he'd realized. The analytical thinking, the attention to detail, the ability to synthesize complex information under pressure, all skills that proved invaluable in intelligence work. He'd given me tools he didn't know I'd need for a career he couldn't understand. On graduation day from the War College, my parents sat in the front row as I received the Distinguished Service Medal for exceptional meritorious service in a duty of great responsibility. The citation was necessarily vague, mentioning only critical contributions to national security operations. But my father's expression as he watched the ceremony told me he finally understood that success couldn't always be measured in conventional terms. After the ceremony, we went to dinner at the same restaurant where we'd celebrated my law school graduation 15 years earlier. The conversation was different this time, less focused on financial security, more interested in the satisfaction I found in my work. "I owe you an apology," my father said over dessert. "I spent so many years worried about your bank account that I forgot to ask whether you were proud of what you were building." "And what have I built, Dad?" He considered the question carefully, the way a good lawyer weighs evidence before reaching a conclusion. "You've built a life that matters," he said finally. "You've built expertise that protects people who will never know your name. You've built a career where success is measured in crises prevented rather than profits generated. I may not understand all the details, but I understand that what you do makes the world safer for people like your mother and me." The $3,000 had been enough, more than enough, to change the course of history itself. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.